I delivered pizzas every week for 2 years to a family. A day after the last delivery I made to them, I came to find out the wife's dead body was 3 feet away from me. Reddit, what are your "he seemed so normal" stories? Worked at a boys and girls club for about a year. The directors, counselors, hardly interact with the admin, but the main admin who is in charge of running the site seemed like a super nice guy and had adopted 2 foster kids, approximately 10 and 12 years old, that actually participated at the club. During our summer training sessions, he was extremely adamant about drawing clear boundaries as far as physical contact with the members, and that anything deemed as inappropriate would result in being arrested by the authorities. A few months after I quit, I come to find out that he had been molesting his foster sons for several years and committed suicide when he found out he was being investigated for embezzling from the nonprofit company. I interned at a boys and girls club on the admin side of things for a few months. During this time, I met a guy who ran their summer camp, take inner city kids to a woodsy camp for a week. He used racial slurs and talked about the girls in a creepy way. I had to ride in his car for an hour and he kept asking me, female about 23 years old, to his house for dinner, and I kept saying no. It was weird, not normal conversation stuff. Then he starts threatening to just take me to his cabin that he has in the woods. Right then and there, I am starting to get seriously freaked out. I yell and freak out and demand to be taken back. He does comply, but starts to be like, "Oh, I was only joking." I tried to tell my boss and everyone else in the administration about this guy, and no one believes me. They tell me how I must have misunderstood, that he's done so much for the organization, wouldn't believe he is a racist nor creepy. Then a month later, the president and the VP or director or whatever, several of the high-ups in the admin office got busted for embezzling. It ruined my perspective of nonprofits forever, and I will always be angry that no one took action against this guy who at the very least was racist, not a good pairing with inner city youth, and skeezy, and at the worst could have been a molester rapist. My father, being a very racist man, never approved of my best friend when I was a kid. She was black. He would tolerate our hanging out outside, but forbade me going anywhere near her house, saying he didn't trust her family. My mom, understanding how ridiculous my father could be, would cover for me on a couple of occasions so I could spend the night at her house. She lived with her father, stepmother, and 4 half-siblings. Nights were spent watching TV, eating junk food, and listening to music. Normal adolescent rubbish. The father would occasionally give me a weird vibe, but I would attribute that to my dad's influence. Fast forward 6 years, she found me on Facebook and we ended up exchanging numbers to catch up. During that call, she admitted that her father had been raping her since the age of 8 and that it continued until late into her teens. It only stopped because a friend reported him. She admitted to having liked when I spent the night because it was one of the few times he would leave her alone. It still haunts me. Your poor friend. How sad. There are so many unavenged victims. I grew up in a small town. We had one arcade in town and my friends and I would spend every free moment we could there. The guy who owned it was in his early to mid-30s, looked like Billy Corrigan, and lived in an apartment above the arcade. He seemed like a cool guy. We talk about video games and pen and paper RPGs a lot. One time it was raining pretty hard and he gave me a ride in his DeLorean, 1.21 gigawatts, which was totally rad. Mike seemed like a pretty cool guy. Years passed and one morning I'm sitting in the high school library reading the morning paper before class. There he is on the front page being arrested for sodomizing young boys in his apartment above the arcade. It totally blew my mind. When I got home from school that day, my mom met me at the door. "Did he touch you? The man in the DeLorean, did he make you do things?" Billy Corrigan's lookalike who owned the local arcade molested children. My mom became convinced I was harboring a molesty secret. I wasn't. "The man in the DeLorean, did he make you do things?" Having strange visions of Back to the Future. While I never actually experienced this, my grandparents have told me a story from when my grandpa used to work on the freeways around Los Angeles. My grandpa was pretty close with some of his work buddies. One man in particular was very friendly, and my grandpa would talk with him almost every day as they worked alongside one another grading and paving the freeways. He even offered to watch my mom, aunt, and uncle if my grandparents were busy because he had some exotic animals at his house that the children loved. After a while, my grandparents moved away, and many years later, my grandpa got a call from a detective asking about this man. Apparently, this guy murdered young children and had been burying them in the freeways as they were being built. Luckily, my grandparents never trusted him with their kids. When I was in elementary school, I had this happy hippie art teacher. She was very fun and nice. She had a clay jar with a cork top that said fairy dust on it that was full of glitter. She would sprinkle it out on our heads on the way out the classroom. Eventually she left because she had cancer. Years later, I guess she couldn't take it, so she went to a gas station, covered herself in gas, and lit herself on fire. She actually killed herself there at the gas station around all of those people. I was the manager at a sandwich place that was in a very bad neighborhood, one of the highest crime areas in the country. I was never too concerned though, because we were directly across the street from a police station. We had one regular customer who came in 2 to 3 times a week. He didn't look anything like 90% of our customers. He was middle-aged, clean-cut, always in a long-sleeve button-up shirt and tie. He said he was a teacher and talked about his students and all the great things he did for them. Honestly, I would have said he was a hero. Then one day, he walked into the restaurant with a gun in his right hand and he was crying his eyes out. He was babbling a little bit and just bawling. He walked up to the cashier, who hadn't had a chance to move away, pointed the gun straight at her, paused, then pointed the gun at himself and attempted to pull the trigger, but dropped the gun instead. A customer tackled him and a group of us made sure he stayed on the ground, and the police came and took him away pretty quickly thereafter. We came to later find out that he had discovered his wife had cheated on him with one of the students, and he had killed her about 10 minutes before he came into the restaurant. What kind of sandwich would he get there? During my parents' divorce, they remarried when I was 14. My mom married this dude, Todd, after knowing him for 3 weeks. He was a truck driver with a mustache and a huge beer belly. My sister and I automatically hated him because he wasn't dad to us. Fast forward 4 months later, their marriage comes to an end and we move out in a single night. Turns out, while he was watching us while mom was at work, he was actually in their bedroom fapping to kiddie porn. My sister also confided in me later that she would wake up sometimes and he would be in our closet watching us sleep. Mom marries a secret pedophile. Get us out of there. In elementary school and early middle school, there was a man that lived at the very end of my road. My road consisted of 4 other homes. Each of the 4 other ones had children. We all knew the guy pretty well, all 5 of us kids, and we'd go over there periodically and hang out in his basement. His kids were all grown up, so he said he liked the company. He always had those cheap but delicious frozen icy pops. He also rescued abandoned ferrets and fostered them until someone else could take them, and had a good 10 plus of them at a time. We loved going over there, playing with the ferrets and listening to his stories as we ate popsicles. We found out years later that he had been arrested for child molestation when he hit about 7th grade. By that time, we all knew full well what child molestation was, and none of us had ever been touched by him. To this day, I have no idea if he was wrongly convicted, if someone on our street was lying about being molested, or if he just managed to keep his cool around us for some reason. I used to hang out with a possible pedophile as a kid and play with his ferrets. Dude had standards, obv. I had a substitute teacher in high school that was always really nice and got along with all the kids. He was even cool enough to let us have class on the roof of the school, accessible by a window. It just came out recently that he tried to kill his wife by shoving her off a cliff in Maine. He did it to try and get her money that she had recently inherited. Made me second guess all of the time I spent on the roof with him. Trying, that had to be an awkward drive home. When I was growing up, my friend's Joe's dad was just a random dad. He had a job as the head social worker at this home for troubled teens. Very respectable in our Volvo driving farmers market going liberal enclave. He just was a normal dad. Then one day, years later, he's on the news for driving his car into a trailer park, luring a 7-year-old girl into it to help him look for his lost puppy, and then raping her. I am still friends with Joe, but have never mentioned the thing about his father. Kind of awkward. When I was a kid growing up in Maryland, we had a neighbor named Walt. Walt taught me how to fish and how to catch Chesapeake Bay blue crabs off of their pier behind our house. He was always happy to look after me when my folks were busy, and he had a pretty impressive fish tank in his place. Every day after school, I would stop by to see him, and he would let me feed his fish. I learned a lot from Walt, but what I didn't learn until 20 years later was that Walt was legally blind. When I was a kid, I was in theater class with an amazing instructor. He was funny, talented, and a great teacher. One day, my parents and I were driving somewhere when they asked me, "If the instructor ever did something to you, you'd tell us, right?" I had no idea then what they were talking about. A few days later, I learned that the instructor had been arrested for molesting 2 boys at the school that he worked at his day job. My mom asked me at least once a week if anyone had been touching me or asking me to keep secrets for them. I have no idea if this was ever pointed toward anyone, but she asked me so much I was pretty sure something was wrong with me since no one was actually touching me despite this apparent danger. When I was in junior high, I was in the Boy Scouts, late 1980s. A new kid joined our troop and he had lived near me, so we hung out. His dad was an OBGYN and former Air Force officer. I always had wanted to be in the AF, and his son did too. We used to practice our first aid and such over there and seemed like such a normal family. Over time, we lost contact with each other. Then, while in high school, the father is arrested and is in the local paper. Ends up, the father had been abusing his patients for years. The son ended up leaving the area, but I did see his graduation pic from West Point, so at least he made it through. I thought you were describing Ron Paul in the beginning. OBGYN Air Force had a son. That's messed up though. Growing up, I had a friend who lived across the street in our upper middle class neighborhood. Her dad owned a protein shake and supplement shop in our town. And one day he was arrested for producing and distributing date rape drugs in the back room of the store. It also came out that her mother was a stripper at the local club. In retrospect, after all this came out, I remembered a time that we were hanging out and my friend had a bag of rock candy. It was legit rock candy, not sketchy stuff. She offered me some saying, "Try this candy. It makes women lose their minds." Weird sayings like that go in one ear and out the other until somebody like Date Rape Daddy happens. Her line is just too perfect.